Okay, everybody. So on our show today, I've got a VW character in the world that you guys may be familiar with. Now, this particular individual is out of the Midwest. He's been involved with the VW scene quite heavily. You may know some of his work from VW Trends or Ultra VWs. And if some of you guys walk the line like me, I think he may have done, we've got some similar tastes on a lot of levels, and he's also been involved with Excellence Magazine, as well as a contributing photographer and writer for several different publications. On today's podcast, I'd like to welcome Dave Conklin. Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Bill, thanks for having me.
We've been kind of chatting back and forth, and I'm familiar with a lot of the stuff that you've been involved with over the past couple of years. You know, since you're in the Midwest, and you've been focusing a lot more on some of the Porsche stuff and things to that, and a lot of writing that you've been doing for Ultra VW overseas, or some of the other publications that we may not be getting. As you know, how we start the podcast here every time, it's how did you get into Volkswagens and what's your VW story?
Well, it seems like I came out of the womb as a car guy. My parents joke about how even before I could talk, I would run to the door when a loud car would go by on our street. It's from birth. I've always been attracted to cars. As a very young person, child, I was just fascinated with them. You know, before I was 10 years old, I could name all the cars on the street. I just had a car problem. I do have a car problem. It's gone on. But yeah, my dad had been a car guy before he got married and started having kids. I had two older sisters. I was the young one in the family. I was a baby. So about 10 years between me and my next oldest sister. So they were driving when I was 6, 7, 8 years old. They were getting their first cars, and the first cars Dad bought for them were Volkswagens. My oldest sister got a '63 Black Beetle, and the next sister got a '67 Black Beetle, and we just got into Volkswagens. Dad found them. You know, he had a limited budget, but he liked tinkering, so he could work on them. You know, we got the J.C. Whitney catalogs, and we would work on my sister's cars, and then when they were out of the house, he went and bought a '67. It was pretty rusty, and he didn't have any network. He didn't have a lot of tools, equipment, anything like that. So it was bending up aluminum sheet and pop riveting it in, and he was pretty good with the body work. You wouldn't have known for at least for a few years till it started popping out again. But he built a nice little burgundy '67, kind of J.C. Whitney look, quasi-cow look car when I was still pretty young. But we'd buy Volkswagens, strip them out for parts, for stuff we were working on. We got to the point where I think the two of us in about 20 minutes could walk up to a car and pull the motor out of it, have it on the ground. And, it was pretty fun when you're 10, 11 years old.
So your dad was pretty mechanically savvy.
He was, yeah. Yeah. And he taught me an awful lot. I've kind of got just a natural inclination toward that, I guess you could say.
Sure.
I've always turned wrenches. I've always liked working on things, but he taught me an awful lot with that. So.
And now this is in the Midwest, right? I mean, you're not from the West Coast.
Right. No, born and raised here, just south of Dayton, Ohio.
Okay. So, and that's is that the area they call the Rust Belt?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Like everything there just rusts because of, weather and salt on the roads and all that stuff. So it's the VW world's a little different for you out there now, because you got into VW. So like for us out here, I'll see like a hot rodded Bug or something pink in the 80s or whatever, and I get into it, but it wasn't the same for you guys over there, was it? I mean, you didn't have like a big street scene look and all that kind of stuff, did you?
Not at all. Like I said, we'd get to J.C. Whitney.
Right.
I'd peel through that, sitting at home, summer vacation. I'd build my fantasy Volkswagen out of the J.C. Whitney catalog. And then I remember we went to visit my grandmother down in southern Ohio when I was 9 years old, not quite 10 years old. And we went to the grocery store, and funny enough, in this southern Ohio, pretty much down in the holler, a little little grocery store, they had hot VWs. I had never
Yeah.
seen hot VWs before. So my dad bought it for me. And I'd been reading car magazines. I mean, since I was like 6, 7 years old, hot rod, things like that. And to see a dedicated Volkswagen magazine just blew my mind. So here I
Right.
was, 9, 10 years old, and that was what really triggered me was that, and I still have that magazine. I can go right
Oh,
to
do
it.
you?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Which episode? Which issue is it?
That was the August 1980 issue of Hot VWs.
And what's interesting is being a VW enthusiast, and I know that we're going to get into that a little bit. We're really multi-platform car guys, right? Like we both have some similar cars, and but I think when you have something that you really like about a Volkswagen, and you're just seeing hot rod magazine after hot rod magazine, you're looking in the background for cars in the parking lot, like, oh, there's a bug there, and there's trying to find somebody that's doing something similar to what you're doing. So when's the first? So you get that Hot Wheels magazine in 1980, and is that the issue that you start getting introduced into like the street look and the cow look and stuff like that? What they're doing on the West Coast?
Immediately
Yeah.
went right for the cow look. As I recall, that issue it was either that issue or the very next one. It had a California look section in it. It wasn't the official issue, cow look issue, but it had a section in it with 3 cars. I still remember them. It was a beige 65 and a blue 68 or 9 on Rivieras, and I think it was Don Melling's oval window, baby blue oval window. Burnt in, man, because that's all I would do. I just sit there and go from front to back in these magazines over and over and over. But yeah, for whatever reason, the cow look was immediate for me. I was fascinated by it, just blown away by it.
I mean, we had a girl in our car club back in the day, and she was from South Dakota, and we called it the South Dakota look. Like she had like Jackman style wheels with low profile tires and flared fenders with a little pinstripe and stuff like that on there. And there's distinctly, I think, a Midwest look. That's because the cow look, the streets are nice. They're not designed for water runoff and all that kind of stuff like they have in the Midwest and other areas that get snow. So like people can drive their cars super low, but I think what happens is, form follows function, where in the Midwest, you can't have your car super slammed because you've got these, ingress, egress of these places you got to get to. So when you decide to follow the cow look, man, like you're committed. And then where do you start? I mean, this is before the internet, right? So for you to get a set of Porsche alloys or something like that, that's kind of an ordeal, huh? Like what's your first way you build a car?
Well, when I was, I think 13, my dad had a business trip down to South Carolina. And he'd learned his lesson from that 67 he built. Just it's not worth it to deal with rust.
Right.
I still very much believe that. I mean, just go buy a good car. You're light years ahead. But even by then, early 80s, early mid 80s, Volkswagens were going away back here because they had just all rusted down. So yeah, we went down to South Carolina for a week, and we found a car down there. Got the local trading post and found a beige 69 sedan, super clean little car. I mean, it was, looking back on it, it was a really nice little car. Yeah. And we found a local Volkswagen shop and bought their tow bar from them.
I'll take that, $30. Like,
yeah, well, Dad's like, I need a tow bar. Do you have any? And they're like, no, just the one we use to drag cars around with. He's like, how much? And they're like, well, we have to replace it, so full price, even though it's used. I used that tow bar for probably 25 years, but yeah, so we threw it behind our Ford Granada and drug the thing home to South Carolina, and spent the next, I guess, 3 years restoring that car. It was fun. It was cool. I learned a lot. We did it all ourselves. Dad painted it in our single car garage. The paint turned out nice. He was actually he's really good with the paint and body, for what little equipment and experience he had. Painted it a GM like fire mist burgundy.
Oh, okay.
Dechromed it. Had a friend that could weld, so we, asked him to weld up the holes, which he did for us. Eventually, I found another deck lid and welded up had this buddy of ours weld up the holes in it and had a punch full of louvers and MP8 spokes and 145s and 165s. I was 15, 16 years old, so not even quite ready to drive. And Yeah, it was a nice little clean, low budget, quasi
And
cow look car.
what's funny, well, and I don't know why you're saying quasi. I mean, maybe because of the style, but I think like there's always this debate where 67 earlier cow looks. But if you go back in the late 70s, early 80s, guys are using 68, 69s. I mean, all that part, like the MP8 spoke to me as a cow look wheel.
Oh yeah,
You know,
yeah. No,
and
I
I
see
mean,
that the two things there you hit on. The first, I agree wholeheartedly. If you go through those magazines in the late 70s through the mid, even late 80s, the
yeah,
late model cars were the cool cars.
they
68 to
were.
71. That there were more cow look cars in hot VWs of that era than there were pre 67 cars.
Yeah.
Why that changed, I don't know. I think they still look great, but that's another tangent. But yeah, quasi cow look car because, in my mind, it wasn't quite low enough. It had a 1600 dual port. I found a set of junkyard 041s that I put on it, and a set of 40 Delordos I got pretty cheap and put on it. So, 1600 stock cam, stock compression, dual 40 Delordos. That was a good runner. But it looked good. It looked real good. And
I've got a picture over here. It's got a good stance, and they'll be able to see on the video copy of this. But it's a sharp looking car, man. For what year is that you're cruising that thing around?
I started driving that in '87.
Nice.
So yeah, it was fun. The only cow look Volkswagen in my part of Ohio.
And so, what was the scene like? Like, where do you get together? I mean, because you got to go. I mean, VW people got to look for other people, or you're just the outcast at the Chevy meets.
There was no scene other than there was some. There's a local shop. Larry's Off Road was kind of the local parts house, and they did a lot of dune buggy stuff. But they also raced. A couple of the guys there at that shop were into drag racing, so they. There were a handful of fairly hardcore racers, but as far as street guys, yeah. I mean, back here in the Midwest and Ohio, you were either building a 1641 for the street or a race motor. There was no, 2276 with IDAs. That was a race motor. You're not going to drive that on the street. That's ridiculous.
Right. And so, what happens to this car?
I managed to wreck that one, Bill.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I rear-ended a lady at a stoplight. So, yeah, I did that. I was dating my wife at the time. Kind of got a wild hair and started cutting it up because by now it's 1989, 1990. And, the custom thing was more coming in. And so, and I was learning to weld and fabricate and, wanted to use those skills I was learning. So I took the doors off of it. My brother-in-law made some hidden hinges for me. He was a street rodder and fabricator, and I did suicide doors with hidden hinges and 67 front clip and deck lid and rear apron, and smoothed everything out and trick dash and got it in the primer and just realized, well, two things happened. I realized I didn't really like it. It just wasn't, because by then, by
Custom wasn't
1991,
your thing.
well, yeah, by 1991, we were starting to see the whole DKP thing come back, right?
Well, the resto custom look starts to come about, right? Like where it's kind of vintage and the suicide doors and all that stuff. By the time you sharpen your tool set, like that's starting to phase out, right?
Exactly, yeah. And then the Hot VWs came out with the DKP guys on the cover, Schwimmer and Gary Berg and Dave Mason, and that was like, oh wow, those are street cars. They got big motors. I always wanted to go fast. So I sold that to a friend who built a race car out of it. And it's right about the same time I found my 67 I have now. So that would have been 93, I believe.
And the 67 you have now, that's kind of the car you're known for because of all the work and how long you've had that car. And really, it's interesting. I ran into Scott Smith at the Grand National Roadster Show. Actually, I was talking to Aaron Broughton, and we started talking about Scott Smith. He goes, "Hey, I know Scott. He's here. He's a paint rep because he was a painter by trade." And Scott Smith had the black 67 that was like,
empty car.
In my opinion, that was like the first all empty car. Like he won the empty race, right?
Right. Oh, that car was so cool.
Yeah, that car just had. And what's funny is, back then, you had two things happening with the scene, right? It seemed like the the custom thing was really pushing way past the point of cool. Like it was getting kind of funky where people doing these wild body mods. And I remember there was a guy that had like a VW logo over his back window, and it was
Yeah.
going like spinner wheel style almost.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had the resto custom thing starting to come in, and then the resto custom thing, people get caught between like, okay, I want to do impy stuff, but I also want to do vintage, like rock guards and all that kind of stuff. And so there was a fine line, but it's interesting that the cowlook vibe has always kind of stayed classic and traditional.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And as that starts to come back, you start to see the DKP thing, and then what cowlook.com is happening, and which you're
that wasn't
helping.
for another decade or so. That came along.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So now you see the cowlook cars. You see this thing,
Mm-hmm.
and gets you motivated to start doing that. You buy your 67, or do you pick up the 67?
20 minutes from home. It was a Texas car. Air Force guy got it from the base. It's actually a German market car. It's a Euro 1300. So somehow it made it over to an Air Force base in Texas where this guy got it. He actually raced it at some of the Ennis, Texas bug-ins back in the 80s
really?
with a little motor and, original paint and all that. And he brought it back here and stuck it in his garage, and I bought it for $850. Nice, clean little European 67. Neat car. Had four-wheel drum brakes from the factory. Steering column lock.
But it had four-lug brakes, right?
Yeah, four-lug drums. Yep. The 1500 got four-lug discs, but the 1300 had drums.
Now this is and this is kind of before. Did you know it was a Euro model when you bought it, or you're just like, man, this guy changed all this stuff? Or
no,
where were you at?
I could tell it had Euro headlights on it. No four-way flashers because they didn't do that in Europe at that point.
Right.
And I was already kind of a 67 nerd anyway. My dad had two of them and loved them, and reading all the Hot VWs magazines, soaking it all up, and that was kind of my jam.
So you knew it was a European 67.
Yeah.
Nice. So you get this car, and he's got a motor in it when you buy it? Like it's already kind of a peppy motor, or what?
No, it had no motor at the time, so just a rolling chassis.
So 850, you pick this car up, and you're like, I'm going cowlook style with it, and then what's your plan for this car?
Well, it's funny, about the same time, you talked about the MP stuff and Scott Smith's car. That car was an inspiration. I really dug that thing. And the MP stuff was cool because I'm a parts hunter. I love swap meets. I mean, anybody that knows me, I'm the first guy at the swap meet. It's my favorite days of the year, swap meets. I love the whole treasure hunt thing. And so I got into the MP thing. It's the first MP parts I bought, Bill. Kind of a neat story here. I don't even know where I saw them advertised, probably our local trading post. Some guy about an hour north of us, way up in farm country, had a set of MP gauges, Japanese ones, and one of those MP oil cooler mounts that goes on the rear grill below the rear window on a sedan for the off-road cars. And you bolt two doghouse coolers on it and just hang out there in the wind. So he had, it was a young guy too, and he had these gauges and this stupid oil cooler. And I called him and worked out a deal. I was going to go meet him. I'm like, I don't know if these are really worth it, or I didn't know what I didn't know. So I just picked up the phone and called Hot VWs. And Dean Kirsten answered the phone. And you know Dean, right?
Yeah.
Nicest guy in the whole wide world. He was so nice, and he walked me through everything. Here's what you look for, and here's what you should pay, and all this stuff.
That's
Gave me all the information.
Pretty lucky to get him on the phone.
Yeah, right. But I was impressed because I've been reading this guy's stuff for years, and then he was just the kindest, most generous guy with his time. No attitude at all, and we've gone on to become very good friends. In fact, he taught me a lot of good photography skills when I was first learning to shoot cars. We'd be at events together, and he'd give me pointers and help me set stuff up. And he's always been a really good friend. But so I got into the MP stuff. Got the steering wheel and some other stuff, and went down that route as well.
Yeah, I mean, at that time it was like because they weren't reproducing the MP stuff, it became highly sought after.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's an interesting dynamic that takes place when they start to mass reproduce things. Like if you're a collector, you're almost like, well, where are you torn? Are you going to buy the repro and put it on your car so that you can actually use it and let it wear out? Or are you just going to keep the new one in the box on the shelf?
Yeah, see, I'm neither. I was never the kid with the Hot Wheels that kept them in the package. I played with them, man. So it's the same with my parts.
And I'm a full believer in that you should, if you're going to collect stuff to use it, collect it to use it, but to collect it to store it for the next guy who might use it, I don't see much sense in that. The impy parts, did you start going down an impy path with the 67?
Yeah. So I found a wheel. I found a new old stock steering wheel, one of the big button wheels. And the gauges, ascending unit, pretty neat little footrest, MP footrest, dead pedal kind of thing. I forget several other things. But then also the cow look thing. I found a really nice 67 vert deck lid, which was a big deal. It was a huge score. Got that for the car. And originally I remember it was so huge. I called, what was the polishing company that did all the 5-spokes? Magmasters, remember them?
Yeah, Magmasters, yeah.
I remember saving up money and calling them with a credit card and ordering a set of polished MP replicas, American Eagle or something replicas. And that was the first wheels that went on the car for a very brief amount of time.
Have you been to California yet to meet any of these guys that you started to introduce, meet over the phone and whatnot?
No, at that point I hadn't. Right as I was finishing the car up was about the time the internet became somewhat ubiquitous. So that would have been 97, 98. And,
right.
It was before any real dedicated sites. And we would just use AOL, the instant messenger. But there was as I recall, there was like a group messaging or different messenger groups on AOL. And there was a cow look one. And so I got into that, started meeting some really cool guys. I remember Hot VWs ran an article on the Classic and they had all the DKP cars lined up. And I'm like, honey, we got to go next year. And so, 98 was my first year out to the Classic. I didn't know anybody, but I just wandered around. But that was great for me, Bill, because here I was just wrapping up this car and I built it in my parents' garage. I painted it myself. I did everything myself because I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. It wasn't perfect, but I was pretty proud of it. I thought it's pretty nice, but it's nowhere near the DKP cars.
Right. It's not that nice.
Yeah. And so then I go out to the Classic, and what a great experience that was because I got to see all the DKP cars, and they are so cool. But none of them were perfect. They all had some age to them.
They drive them. Yeah.
They drive them, they use them, they raced them. Most of them had a little bit of age to them by then. And so they had their flaws, and I'm like, okay, I can do, I can play in this arena. This is great. It was really confidence inspiring, or confidence building in me to see him in person. And so that just doubled me down. And I went back and really went to it. The other thing that happened, not that year, but the next year, I went back to the Classic, and I had been talking to this guy named Mark Herbert online. On AOL, he'd pop into these chat groups and stir up trouble and stuff. And didn't really know the fellow, but just knew his name and talking with him and he knew what he was doing. But I went to the Pomona swap year before, the week before the Classic. And as I'm walking out of the place, I see this like 6'5" lanky dude carrying a couple magnesium American racing wheels. Or no, I'm sorry. I think they were aluminum. Anyway, and that's one of the ways I built my car was I would scour junkyards in Ohio and old race shops and stuff. And that was before American racing was reproducing the torque thrusts for anything.
Well, and what just ran across my mind is I'm thinking like, this is like late 90s. You're in the Midwest. You get a deep taste of California. And now you've got an advantage of everybody in the Midwest because nobody's really looking for this stuff out in the Midwest like they're looking for on the West Coast. You've got kind of virgin territory out there.
That's true, yeah. But I had scoured, like I said, American wasn't reproducing torque thrusts for domestic cars even at that point in time.
Right.
So I was scouring junkyards, buying vintage torque thrusts and selling them to the hot rod guys. And that's how I was making money to build a car. That and, anything else I could buy and sell and flip, swap meets and whatever.
Yeah.
So I knew all about Americans. So I see this guy carrying these wheels. I'm like, whoa, dude, what are those? And he was so pumped up. He's like, oh man, these are American racing wheels, but they're for Porsche. Like, whoa, I didn't know they even made those things.
Yeah.
So that kind of triggered me to go find a set of those for my car. And when I got back, I just, I started scouring and found a set out of Florida, I believe, or Maryland, something like that. And had the fronts narrowed to 4 inches and put them on my car. But yeah, that was Mark Herbert. Got to know him really well. He was a great dude.
No, I mean, there's, I think what's so great about the VW scene is like, I think as individuals where we're kind of belong to that VW brotherhood, like we kind of pump each other up. It's weird because, there's some people come out from the Midwest or the East Coast, they'll come out to the VW Classic and that first experience. And I think it depends how you enter the water, right? Like if you're coming out there with your car is different than if you're just coming out by yourself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And some people that have bought their car and they kind of got cold shouldered a little bit. I remember even when I brought my Type 34 Ghia, when the weekend I'm debuting that car, I'm thinking like, yeah, Nick's Burger, big deal. I'm going to ISP West, and these guys are going to trip out when they see a Type 34 Ghia built like this. And then I get there, and it's just, and then I realize Type 3 guy's a little strange. So, but no, all joking aside, but I just part of it because although we build our cars for us, we're inspired by others, and then we want to see other people get inspired or motivated by seeing our car. So there's a couple different ways that happens. So it's good that you get to come out there without your car. I think it's better if you come out without your car first. You kind of get to know people.
Yeah.
Versus like you're coming out there, because I think we all think like, when I come out, wait till they see my car, and then you don't get the response you're looking for, right? So. Oh, dude,
Bill, I was such a dork. I was carrying around pictures of my car, unfinished. But I had to have at least some, I'm legit. I got a car. I'm building it. Here it is. And I'm showing everybody these pictures. So yeah, I was kind of a dork. But
that's the fun part, right?
What's that?
But that's the fun part, right? Like just having that connection with these people from across the country,
Yeah. I remember at Pomona, I ran into a guy from somewhere in Europe, Belgium, I think. He was from Belgium. And we start talking because we were looking at some cowlick parts or MP parts or something. We get talking and I said, yeah, I'm building a 67 cowlick car. He's, oh, I am too. And I showed him pictures of my car and he's like, a cowlick car like that in Ohio? And I'm like, dude, you're from Belgium. What are you talking about? And he was building a really cool car too. But and he was just shocked that a guy in Ohio. I'm like, really? You're from Belgium, but whatever.
Yeah.
But no, 99, the second trip back out, by then we had Keith Zoom had started the Cowlick Forum. And so now I was knowing some more people. And that was great. Just really met a lot of good people. Got to have lunch over at Steve Beecher's house, one of the DKP guys.
Yeah, I know
Steve ended up building gearboxes for me for years as favors and, giving me the buddy deals and stuff. He built a great gearbox. Got to spend a lot of time with Mark Herbert, got to go for a ride in the SSB once or twice, that's a whole nother story for another session.
Yeah, I'd almost like to I think there's value in doing a podcast just on Mark Herbert, the whole story of all of that, because I was there that classic weekend, and there's a lot to people that we don't know, and that's one of the things maybe down the road I'd like to do is just assemble some people to share some stories about him to kind of tie that whole thing together. And this time, so it's early 2000s now. You're starting to get online with the Cowlick Forum and starting to help moderate some of that stuff and be really heavily involved in that. Which the internet, I think, is one of the things that really changed the hobby for us in a huge way. Now all of a sudden, the world got real small, and if you've got the money, you can find it. And one of my favorite things is like the tricks of finding, like searching things, and you're finding things in different forums or in different classifieds that are hidden VW treasures that aren't in the Sonic. It's almost like, once they make it to the Samba, they've gone the way of like being overpriced. But I mean, there's so many things that changed with the advent of the internet. And I know that we talked a little bit about our generation when we all started getting on Samba. I mean, I just went back and looked at a couple threads that I was talking to people on, and I'm like, man, I got to delete these because I really sound like a douche. I'm like looking at them because you get so fired. It was so crazy because you get so fired up, you know, getting online. You're like, hey, check out my car, and then somebody just says something cross about your car, and then you're just like, wow, why would somebody say? I thought we're all like buddies in the VW world, and it would take a turn pretty quick. Yeah. What was your experience like with the Cowlick Forum and all that stuff back then?
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. You know, my really dear friend John Plow started Cowlick.com, and we were at the Classic, matter of fact, and walking around, and he says, I've got this idea. It's a great idea. He said, I'm going to do a website just dedicated to Cowlick cars. I'm like, that is a stupid idea. What you know, what are you going to do? So he brought that out, and I started helping him with that. And then about that time, or a little bit later, Keith was getting tired of dealing with the forum. So he just kind of handed over the Cowlick Forum to John to make part of Cowlick.com and to blend it all into one. And that was perfect timing. Brought everybody together. Shortly thereafter, I called him up. I remember one night I called him up and I said, hey, I got this crazy idea. Why don't we do a top 10 contest for street cars? And we'll just have a contest, year-long contest, and everybody that runs their cars at the track, they just submit a time slip, and at the end of the year, we'll give out little dash plaques and some prizes for the top 10, and it'll be a hoot. And yeah, we had a good time with that. A lot of drama. Good grief, a lot of drama. Because what is a street car, right? So, you know, you got Mark Herbert there with the SSB, and you got guys with full interiors, and you know, everything in between. And so we were constantly trying to police that and keep people calm, and it still was a lot of fun. And you know, CB Performance and Scat and VW Paradise, a lot of the great in some really generous prizes. It was pretty neat. You know, people were winning some pretty cool stuff for running quick ETs, and that bred some serious competition too amongst, you know, internationally. So you had like Paul Bate over in England with his orange car, which is just amazingly fast. And
the first year you guys are doing this, what slips are people turning in? Like, what are the fast slips at the time? 12s?
Street cars were high 11s.
Really?
Aspirated cars were high 11s. Turbo cars were in the 9s. We had two. We had the top 20 for the aspirated cars and top 10 for the turbo cars. So that led to, that was when the Ren Kafer Cup thing was going on too. So you had the DKP guys and all those guys out in your neck of the woods doing that.
Well, I say that's interesting you bring that up because I just talked to Lee Bashaw last week, which he's going to be coming on the podcast soon. And I, you know, me being a custom guy and like doing my own thing with building the gi and all that stuff. I remember in 2009, the Ren Kafer was happening at the Vegas Bug-In, and I'm in my Type 34 Gia. And I'm like, oh, this is cool, you know, but to me, that's like, I'm in a different world. I'm in like trying to push the bar, not really paying attention to the Cowlick thing. But I do remember seeing some super nice Cowlick cars out there, and everything's on BRMs, and they all look good, but they're freaking ripping fast.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was talking earlier with him, and so I kind of went down this rabbit hole where I pull up this video, some street race video, or racing, some kind of racing YouTube channel, where Frenchie's on there with his 54, and he's talking about starting the Duren, the Duren Kafer Cup series,
right? And
the rules and all this stuff, you know, which is classic Frenchie, right? Because Frenchie's like committed to the OG style club,
right?
Like, this is what we're gonna do. These rules have to be followed exactly this way. And today I spent time with a guy that flew in from Jody, who flew in from Maui. And when I met with the Maui guys when I was on vacation, one of the guys down there, Dorigo, owns his car. He owns Frenchie's 54. So it's funny, like all these things kind of come back, and that car's like, oh yeah, it's Frenchie's 54, but Frenchie built that car to start the Duren Kafer Cup series. Like that was kind of the thing that kicked it off.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start that class, then it gets like super competitive.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes for a few years, but then now at this time, are you racing your car, but kind of doing it in the Midwest or?
Yeah, I did get out to California one time to Carlsbad for the classic weekend.
Right.
Before I go down that path, let me tell you a funny story about that whole Rinkafer Cup and that era. So you'll hear once in a while from, especially, well, Dean is good for this one, and then especially my buddies up in British Columbia, Lanny, Jeff Peterson, who, good old Jeff. But they like to use the term Ohio pump gas because I always ran my car on pump gas, right? And so about that time, I think it actually came out of the pro stock VW guys. There was this stuff called propylene oxide. And one of my buddies from California, who will go unnamed, starts telling me about this stuff. And he had a Rinkafer Cup car, right? So one particular year, it was probably like 02, 3 or 4 cars showed up for the Rinkafer races and were running like 2 to 3 tenths quicker than they had the year before with no obvious changes, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm talking to this guy. I'm like, dude, what's going on? He's like, well, keep your mouth shut, but propylene oxide. I'm like, oh, what's that? So that was a fuel oxygenator that, you'd literally pour in the gas tank, and it was like a liquid nitrous oxide. It would add a bunch more oxygen to the mix. So you'd dump that in the tank and jet up a couple sizes, bigger main jets, and the car would pick up 2 solid tenths.
Wow.
Just rip. And nasty stuff though, Bill. It was, I think the flash point on it was like 100 or 110 degrees or something. Extremely volatile, carcinogenic. I mean, it was bad stuff. You had to keep it in a cooler at the track,
Really?
otherwise it could risk catching fire. So anyway, pretty nasty, cancer-causing garbage. So I found a go-kart track not too far away from me that carried this stuff. And I tried it out. Sure enough, the car picked up 2 tenths, baby. And like, oh, this is awesome. And, we're doing that top 10 or the top 20 thing. So it was important. There was some serious ego credit on the line here. But I was the only one that ever admitted it. So, of course, it becomes Ohio pump gas because I'm the dumb one that ever admitted to
You're the labeled cheater, right? But everybody else is doing it.
It's like, guys, I didn't come up with this on my own. Come on, I'm out here in Ohio. But yeah, that was a lot of fun. We had a good time with that. But it goes back to reading Hot VWs when I was 11 or 12 years old. That first article on Gary Berg's car, picture of it coming off the line at Orange County, wheels up, and in part of the article they said he drove it to the track, ran 1239 or 1240, and then drove it home. And that was the goal I made for myself. I'm going to run 1230s and drive the thing to and from the track. I've got a track about 20 minutes away. And before I went turbo with the car, that was a big deal. I finally achieved that goal one night where I drove it to the track and ripped off like a 1235 with pump gas, without propylene, and and then drove it home. Yeah, that was an awesome time.
And what was the drivetrain setup back then? What was 2332 and
no
48s?
2276, 48s, 10 to 1. Pretty mild, really.
What cam?
FK8. Relatively
FK8,
small.
huh?
Yeah. 40 by 37 heads. It's a very small port head.
And you're
small
shifting
valves.
What RPM you shifting at?
771.
Really?
Yeah.
And what heads?
It was a 041 casting done by a guy named Primo Petrucci in Michigan, probably 30 years ago. They're a D-port, unwelded D-port.
So maxed out with paper thin walls and ready to run.
I mean, it's 40 millimeter intakes, so they weren't big valves or anything. The car had tons of torque. It made great torque.
Did you say 40 37s?
40 37s, yeah. Very small.
Normally it's 42 37s. You know what I mean? But
44, yeah.
You got 44 37s. Yeah, that's a pretty conservative setup. So, and now this car, you're just the whole cow look thing, the Rinkafer, the top 10, and then you decide to do what my buddy, I was at Adam Wick's place just earlier. If I'm not dropping enough names in this podcast yet, I'm going to keep going. But
I think I'm ahead of you, but okay.
I was just there, and I was making a joke. We're talking with some of the guys in the shop, and I said, yeah, Adam says the guys that can't make power just go turbo.
Mm-hmm.
And so what makes you decide to switch gears and go turbo on this car?
I go for rides in cars.
Yeah.
And, I'm a pushover. I just like, ooh, I got to have that now.
Sure.
That buddy of mine that bought my wrecked car and made a drag car out of it, I rode in that car on the street before it even had doors and fenders on it. But when I rode in that car, I was like, oh, I got to have 48 IDAs. That's wicked. So I did that. And then I went out to Vegas for one of the events, probably 2004. And Jason Lawfer gave me a ride in his white car, turbo motor, 9-second car. And it was all over. I got to have that. So I came home and put a turbo on it and put a cage in it and put a spool in it and all that craziness. And
so now, what the car best turbos? So it was the same motor setup. So it was a
yeah.
You ran it 10-1 with a turbo.
Dropped it down to 9, which is still a lot for a turbo motor, but
Yeah, I was gonna say turbos are about 8.5. I mean, when you're pushing it, because you make it up on the button. You know what I mean? Like you just crank boost. So how many pounds of boost you ran, and what turbo setup you ran on that thing?
Oh, it was a TO3, TO4 hybrid of some sort. I forget.
Under deck lid, or was it a blow through? Or is it a draw through setup, right?
Oh, it's a big dumb draw through system. No, I decided, huh?
But I've had a draw through. I had a Turbo City draw through setup on the same motor, 1914, and then I switched to the CB EFI blow through, and on the dyno I pulled more power through with the blow through setup, but drivability and punch feel, the draw through just felt so much better.
Really?
You know what I mean? Yeah, and what's crazy is I got more horsepower, but I think my tranny, it was the same motor, 2 different cars. One was a 66, one was a 67, but there were 2 different trannies. And I just think maybe that was a difference in feel, because dyno numbers, the CB EFI setup had more power, but it was more fun. It's just so fun to have that big nasty turbo hanging out of the deck lid. You know what I mean? Like,
well, see, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to ruin the look of my car,
Yeah.
And so I got the brilliant idea of running the header up above the transmission and into the package tray. And I cut the bottom of the package tray out, and I built a box around it where the rear seat would have been.
Right.
And the turbo and the 4-barrel was in there. So looked good because you couldn't see it. You open the deck lid and all that's there is just a motor and a fan shroud. There's no carburetors or anything. But it had a super long intake tract and a lot of heat soak stuck in there. Instead of being out in the air, it heat soaked pretty bad. So it wasn't real responsive on the street. It was real laggy, which that in itself is fun too. A really laggy motor. I mean, the motor made. I put it on chassis dyno one time, and it picked up 100 horsepower and 400 RPM.
Wow.
So it was the proverbial light switch, which was fun, but it wasn't really user friendly.
Like getting rear-ended by a Cadillac.
Yeah. So it wasn't a great design, and I never really got it all dialed in. It made a couple good passes, but I never was thrilled with it.
What was your best ET out of that car?
It went 1084 to 127.
Holy crap. And obviously you switched the gearing on the trans?
Yeah, I put a 388 ring and pinion and a 104 fourth.
Now you running a Bird 5 or no?
No, 4-speed. Yeah.
Still running a 4-speed.
It went through. Well, that pass that best pass I ever made was on 4-wheel drum brakes too, which was terrifying. So it got dissed. It got dissed a month later.
That's a little sketch. Now you're jumping in. You're kind of getting involved with all the Cowlick guys. You're on the forums. You're doing this stuff. Now, when do you cross? Because your day job, you're not as your day job. You're not a photographer and a contributing writer for your day job, right?
No, not at all.
So that how does the genesis of that begin? Where do you start getting in with that?
Dave Cormack from VW Trends.
Yeah.
Great guy. He photographed my car in 2000, I think. And a few months later, we were the next summer, I think it was. We were at the Michigan Vintage Festival, and we set up a cowlook.com display at the Vintage Festival.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend John Plow was there, of course. He was living in Canada at the time, Toronto area. And so he had come down. Matt Homer was there with his orange cowlook car and my car. So we set up this really cool display there at the Vintage Festival. And Cormac shot John Plow's car at the event, but he just didn't have enough time to write everything. You know, he was the only guy pretty much at VW Trends at the time that was doing any of the feature articles. So, you know, he knew I was somewhat literate, and he asked me if I wanted to give my shot at writing a story. And so I did. And that's kind of what it went from there. Funny story about that Michigan event. That was, I listened to your guest about 6 weeks ago that helped put that event on and all that.
Yeah.
He was talking about how when he goes to V8 shows, they kind of look down their nose on the Volkswagens. It's funny. They weren't real happy about the cowlook guys being there back
Really?
then. Yeah, oh yeah, we were the turds in the punch bowl on that event. We set up this tent. We had the cars
at the VW event. At the VW event, or this is
at the vintage VW club.
Really?
Yeah, they're at the Volkswagen headquarters in Michigan. I think what started it was we had a TV and a VCR set up when we were showing the Quaife test video where Mark Herbert does the big smoky burnouts in the middle of the road. And so we had that on a continuous loop because this was before YouTube. No one had ever seen that video before.
Right.
So we had that on a continuous loop with the volume turned up, you know, so maybe a little annoying. And then it was a bunch of vintage people for the most part, and no one had seen IDA motors before. So all these people wanted to hear the cars. And so every 15 minutes, one of us is firing up our car and revving it. And after a while, that was, I think, getting pretty old. And then I think the nail in the coffin was while Dave was shooting John's car over across the road, I was taking somebody for a ride in mine, making passes up and down in front of the Volkswagen headquarters there in Michigan. Third and fourth gear passes. So that kind of brought an end to our day. But anyway, where were we?
But it's funny how even in the Midwest where you guys should be sticking together, like there's like, oh no, here come these street guys.
Well, that was a long time ago too. Times have changed. And we were derelicts too, but so that kind of started me out writing for VW Trends. And then we had a fellow here in town that had an amazing Porsche collection. John Dixon was his name. Mm-hmm. And he was a good friend, and I had access to his cars. And so I reached out to Excellence magazine, the Porsche magazine, and said, I have access to some great cars. Are you interested in me doing some stories? And they're like, well, you can give it a shot. If we like it, we'll run them. And the editor, Pete Stout, was super helpful because, I hadn't been writing that much yet. I didn't know all the little tricks, and I needed a good editor, and he really showed me a lot of help over the years working with him, both with my writing and photography. But that just sort of snowballed from there.
And I mean, you've written for quite a few. I mean, you've contributed for quite a few magazines. I mean, we're talking VW Trends. You were pretty consistent with VW Trends, I think. I remember I remember seeing you a lot in Trends. Mm-hmm. But I do remember noticing your name crossing over with Excellence because, like I said, I've got a collection of Excellence magazines as well. And then you did, some tech pieces for Hot VWs, then Classic Porsche magazine, and then Porsche Panorama. That's kind of a big deal, right? That's the Porsche Club of America's magazine. Uh-huh. It's like, for those of you that might not know this, it's like a baby National Geographic, but it's all Porsche. It's all Porsche stuff. So it's kind of like a mid-sized magazine, and if you're a Porsche guy in the Porsche Club of America, you're gonna get that magazine. So that's kind of a big deal to have stories featured in Panorama, right?
Yeah. Pete Stout, the editor from Excellence, he actually left Excellence and went to Pano, and he was in a time crunch, and so he reached out to me and asked me to do a quick article for him for that first issue he was heading Panorama, and then he continued to mentor me through his time there at Panorama. So that was nice.
Well,
A lot of nice help from him.
I have a crossover to bring up the Bull Run bus now.
Oh, wait, let me get my drink.
So you got to take a shot. So in Excellence magazine, they always have the renderings, and the renderings are done by Steve Anderson.
Right.
And he passed away a few years ago, but I remember after the bus was in Bull Run, I sent him pictures of the Bull Run bus, and I said, I'd like for you. I found out that I found his website, and he would do renderings for cars, and he would not just do anybody's car. It had to be a car of some sort of significance. Mm-hmm. And I reached out to him, and I thought to myself, after looking at his bio, he drew Concept One, he worked for Nissan, he worked for all these automakers, but all his drawings are these pencil sketches. And so I have in my garage on my wall a framed pencil sketch of the Bull Run bus done by Steve Anderson, which was just like, for me, and unfortunately he passed away a few years ago, like 57 years old of a heart attack on,
I remember that,
like an anniversary cruise with his wife. But when I bought it, I thought to myself, most people think $350 is pretty expensive to spend on a pencil drawing of your car, like an actual rendering. And I waited. So he sent me a couple extra, the 356 Heritage and stuff like that, all signed by him. But I looked at it and I thought to myself, the connection that guy has with drawing Concept One, who's one of the rendering guys for Volkswagen, and I thought the connection to that, my appreciating his work that he does in Excellence magazine, and then to have him do that and have it, custom bespoke done for myself. I mean, to me, that's one of my favorite things that I have, because, if you're familiar with his drawings, his renderings, when he does the buyer's guide and stuff like that, he has a certain style the way he does it. And then to see my bus in the same style was pretty cool. And I think it's funny because in today's day, we don't have the artisan type guys that do that, but we do in the same respect. Like, you can have someone custom make you a set of heads or custom build you a motor or do these types of things. And some people go back and forth with things like that. But I look at like that drawing, that pencil drawing he did, and I think like, man, to have that done by a guy that, unfortunately, he passed away early, but 25 years from now, had he not passed away, I'd be like, oh yeah, Steve Anderson did these illustrations and he's got his own boutique thing. I'm thinking like, those are the guys where like they were at a carnival and paid Davey Deal to do a sketch of his bug.
Right.
Think about how cool that is. And we really have access to those things. So I think there's a lot of things out there that we have access to in the VW community that we can have that are kind of custom done one-off of the contemporaries of now that I think in the future will, and you're not doing them to gain value, but I just think it's really cool to capture a piece of that. And I'm really into trying to support those people that are in our scene that are contributing in some way, shape, or form, but whether it's art, photography, or writing or whatever. But I think it's huge that sometimes we see things are so easily accessible. We go, man, it's not worth it to pay that kind of money for that. But It's like, once you have it, it's a one of one.
Yeah.
Well,
when you can connect it with a person too, particularly if you have a relationship with that person, and you can go back and say, they did this item for me. I think that's really cool. You had Clyde Berg on recently, and to be able to say, for the guys that know Clyde and had him do a set of heads to their specifications, say these are Clyde's heads, that's awesome. Really cool.
Well, and so when you're tracking that stuff down, I have the Berg motor that I have in the rag chop. Mm-hmm. And that motor, I was showing someone today. I was touring my garage. I showed him the receipts that I got when the guy was telling me, like, I was buying a Speedster for $400, and the guy's like, "Yeah, I got $2,000 in a motor in that thing." And I'm just thinking, like, yeah, anyway, $2,000, like, what motor? And so the guy hands me these. I have the original receipts from 1988 from Gene Berg, and the guy spent $2,000 on engine parts for a machine-in 1800cc motor, which is the motor that's in the chop top. I pulled out the 2332 and put a machine-in complete 80s built Berg motor in that thing. But it was like, when I popped the valve covers off and I got that motor, it's stamped on the back side of the head, ported by Clyde Berg.
Nice.
And it's just it's those things like that we can get, and they're kind of custom to the scene but there's so many. I mean, I just looked at it. I have a set of Berg specials here because I just pick up these DCNFs wherever I go. And my brother hates them. My brother likes like 48s or some good, you know, just some good. He's a big fan of Delordos, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because jet access and all that stuff. But the DCNFs, my brother just rolls his eyes, calls me an idiot, and says, well, you know, I talked to Clyde on the podcast, like, why Gene like the DCNFs? It's a great carburetor. You know, it's a good, smooth running carburetor. So there's so much of these things in our scene that are they've gained this reputation of from Gene Berg like being a really good carburetor, and then most people hate DC hate DCNFs because they're like, if there's not a 48, it's not worth it. You know what I mean?
Funny story on that. I've got a friend back here. He lives in Indiana, and back in the mid '90s, he built a nice little green cow look car that was in VW Trends, but it had DCNFs on it. And he told me a story one time that he was at an event. It may have been one of the Michigan events or something where Gene was at the event, and he drove through, and Gene stopped him and said, "You got DCNFs on this, right?" And he's like, "Yeah." "How'd you know?" He goes, "I can just hear it. I can just tell."
Yeah.
So, you know, it's
there's a distinct sound with the DCNFs. My brother hates it. It makes I told the story on the podcast before where I was at Pomona Swap Meet and I sold a set of carburetors to Gene Berg and it was DCNFs.
Right.
And I was super stoked about it. Now, meanwhile, today I'm trying to find for Zorba the Gia project, I'm looking for some 44 DCNFs to try to mate up to some wedge port heads because everybody's telling me I'm ridiculous for doing the setup that's in there, but it's a shelf motor that was in there. But I don't want to get too much into me. I want to talk more about you. How do you, because we also share some common interest in vehicles. You're a classy guy, and I knew you were because you have a Riviera.
Right.
And I knew that you, and not a lot of guys get Rivieras.
Right.
Why did you buy a Buick Riviera?
I've had two of them, Bill. Now, me and one of my real good friends in high school, we just never did the Camaro Mustang thing. You know, I had a Beetle, and he had a '77 Impala slammed on rallies and police caps, and but we both, for some reason, loved Rivieras. I mean, there was a guy here in Dayton named Dave Marsh that was well known for buying these just virginal one owner grandma cars and throwing suspension and wheels on them, you know, leaving them stock, typically a big car like a early 60s Impala or something like that.
Right.
Throw some Americans and some rake at it and do the suspension. And he just had a knack for trick cars. And he had two of them when we were teenagers, and we'd go to the local cruise nights, and he'd, the one especially was a white one on polished Americans and bigs and littles, and it just had the right look, you know. And so we liked them. And I bought one late 90s. Had to sell it because I bought my 911. And then a few years back, I was walking through a swap meet and found a tired old California 63 Riviera, and it was too cheap to pass up. And I hadn't had a good fight with the wife for a while, so I, went ahead and bought it. And yeah, it's in my dad's garage. I don't get a whole lot of time to work on it, but it's a fun old car.
You know, what's interesting about Riviera is what got me fired up for Riviera was I used to do car audio, and I saw Jimmy Ray Vaughan.
Jimmy Vaughan
had a lime. Yeah. He's got a lime green one.
I've got that magazine.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
And it's because mine is torn to shreds. The cover's ripped off, but I still have the article with his car. Mm-hmm. And I did car audio installation, and I pieced together the 8-inch JL Audio 8s. I wanted to have that car, right? And I blew up my 63 ragtop, the one that I was trying to find, that I'm still trying to find so I could track down the VIN number. And I was like, I'm done. I'm getting a Buick Riviera. And I found this 65 that I still own today. I found it, 5 miles from my house in somebody's driveway. It was the most I'd ever paid for a car at the time. I paid $1,200. I went down the road of Rivieras, and Rivieras are such a unique vehicle from the standpoint of it's a particular kind of person that buys a Riviera that they don't want a Camaro.
Yeah.
And it looks like a Chevelle, a early 60s Chevelle on steroids.
Well, the thing is, I don't know how they sold them for profit because they were hand built. They're painfully expensive to restore. I mean,
Yeah.
just, you know, like the end caps on the fenders, where typically GM would put a cast pot metal or a plastic end cap on the fender to make the peak. It was all hand hammered, welded, formed, and that was in the early 60s. I mean, it was a crazy car. And that was a mid-sized car. It's gigantic, but it was a mid-sized car at that point
Yeah.
in time. So yeah, I don't know why I have attraction to it. And the weirder thing for me is having been a performance guy all my life, I've never had any desire to own a stock car of any sort. I've never owned a stock car. But a couple years ago, I found a 62 Beetle, original paint, original family, all interior glass, never been hit. Everything's original on this car. And I'm having a lot of fun driving a stock Beetle. It's
Well, you
new. It's a
know,
different experience for me, but it's a lot of fun. People dig it. There's no ego connected to it. It's just a happy little smiley car, and especially the way that things have been the last couple of years, I think it's kind of nice to just drive something friendly. I get a lot of thumbs up and waves, and it's a fun little car.
yeah, I think sometimes it comes with like, when we're all young and it's us, like the Beetle is to me, it's like, it's so punk rock from the standpoint of like, screw you, I'll show you, like that's the attitude with the street racer Volkswagen.
Oh yeah,
But
for
at the
sure.
core, the the car is it's so basic and so simplistic and so like just so under refined that it's so utilitarian that they're really just driving on their bone stock. My most reliable Beetles have been stock 1600s
Hmm.
that like you drive the thing like, oh, I don't have any oil and it's been running for 3 days like this, like my 36er that I had in my oval window. I mean, those cars, they sit in the garage for 6 months, go out, pump the gas twice, they fire right up, they run real smooth. And driving the original ones, like especially original low mileage cars, is super nice, man. I mean, it's just something. It's like you said. I think as soon as you get in, it just becomes more of like, all right, it's time to take it easy. It just
Yeah,
changes your whole view out of the windshield looks
it's
different.
fun to drive a car where you can just put your foot flat on the floor all the time, and
Yeah,
just you don't have to think about it. You just stick it on the floor, and you're not going to speed or anything.
go
Just
over speed bumps, all that stuff. It just
yeah.
cruises. It cruises right through everything. So what are you doing now, and how has life been for you out in the Midwest, especially now we've had a couple years this COVID nonsense where travel's been real shut down,
Hmm.
and now this year it looks like things are starting to kick back up. We've got the Classic happening again, which I'm super excited about
Hmm.
because Prado's okay and it's a ton of people and that's great, and I'm not really a huge big crowd guy, and I'm not
Right.
really like a smoky barbecue, everybody smells like weed guy. I'm just kind of more of like, I want to appreciate some cool cars.
Yeah.
Like that whole Classic weekend for me was the huge
It
draw
was
for
great,
Southern
wasn't it?
California.
Go
It
to
was like,
Nick's for the cruise night, and yeah, that was epic.
I listen in '03. I launched out of there with the Bull Run bus, just laying track out of there because I just wanted, like, that was my coming out party. I was
Hmm.
like there. It was the first year that I had a car that was finished. I was bringing the Classic.
Was that '03?
It was in
That's when
'03.
that's when we were out there.
Yeah, I
We brought
left.
our we brought our cars out. One of the Corn Panzer guys, Chuck Fryer, was a truck driver, and he borrowed a truck and a big 3-car trailer from his boss. And myself and John Plow and Chuck threw our cars on that trailer, and Chuck drove it all the way to California and back. What a guy, right?
Yeah.
By himself, you know. We had
Now
to pay
what's
one ticket, I think he got, but
what's the story on the Corn Panzers? How does that whole thing come together?
uh, it was, with guys, we met up at some swap meets and stuff. Troy Palmer, if you know Troy out in California, he lives there in the LA area. He's a
Yeah.
DKP guy now. Um, he was living back here working for a paint rep and living in Chicago. And I met him at a swap meet, and he was full on cow look and Impy. I mean, that guy was Impy Jones was his AOL name at the time. And if you know Troy, he's just a big, giant ball of testosterone and ego and smack talk. Good God.
Right.
That guy can smack talk. But yeah, I hit it off with Troy. And John was up in Toronto, and Richard Roth up in Cleveland area, and Matt Homer in Detroit. We just, we're online talking to each other, and we'd see each other at shows and stuff. We decided to make this club. And the name actually came from one of the DKP guys. I forget who. Is he saw pictures of our cars and stuff, and at that time we'd go out there and we'd literally have guys like, do you have cities in Ohio? Do your houses have doors? And it's like they've never been out of Los Angeles. I don't know. So
never been
I'm like,
past
no,
the
we
orange
just
curtain.
we just got corn. We just got corn. It's
Right.
little grass huts and corn. That's Ohio. And somebody kind of popped off that name, because we had kind of cow look DKP style cars. And they're like, oh, you're like corn panzers, and it stuck. So we had a really good time. That was a good group of guys to hang out with, and we'd meet up at races and stuff. And me and Troy were constantly kind of seeing who had the quickest car and smack talk, and yeah, it was a good time with those guys. But in 2003 we decided to drag. Troy was already back out in Los Angeles with his car, and so John and myself and Chuck, we took our cars out there and just did the experience. We went to Carlsbad, did a drag day there. We went to the DKP night at Nick's, which was huge. They were cool enough. DKP was cool enough to save us spots right up front. We got to park up front, which was really very kind of them.
Nice.
You've been there just to have your car in that mecca. And for me, having read Hot VWs for my pretty much entire life, just driving up the freeway to different events, to the Classic, to Irvine, and just seeing the highway signs for exits for these cities you've just read about. They're burnt. Yeah, I know. I remember a car in Hot VWs in '87 that was built in that town, and that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah.
It was great going to, like I said, it was Dairy Queen then. It wasn't Nick's, but
it was the Dairy Queen meet, man. I remember we'd go there, and they had carports, I think, set up too at the time at Dairy Queen.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, because I remember like when I pulled out of there, because I had the Type 4. I mean, you're talking 2000. I think it's got to be 2003, because I was just looking at a magazine that the bus was featured in. It was November of 2003. So unless it was 2002, which I don't think it came out a year later. I think it was the same year my car came out. And I remember just pulling out, and I had, to have a Type 4 in a bus back then, especially like an upright Porsche 911 shroud, it was carbon Kevlar, and I got out there and people were listening, and I was like, all right, bro, here it goes.
You got to.
You have to. It's like a rite of passage, right? And then it became kind of the thing. And my attitude was like, listen, I'm not from there, right? I'm not from around here. And I did it at the Pierside Parts open house one time. They were not happy because I kind of stopped the front brake in the carbon cab and just did a big nasty smoke show. And I wasn't allowed back, but they've got new ownership this year, so I think I'm allowed back now. But that was like the thing,
I got two stories from that weekend that I'll never forget. The first was at Dairy Queen. Dino Don comes up, starts talking to me, looking at the car and stuff, and he's like, "Hey, take me for a ride?" I'm like, sure, let's go. And so he guides me out of there and sticks me on a freeway. And of course, I just jump all over it, going on the on-ramp onto the freeway. And we make a full pass down onto the freeway. And as we come past a semi truck, I get hit in the side by a crosswind. It's just as you pass the front of the semi truck, this big crosswind hits us. And I had enough time to just look over my shoulder and be like, hold on. And we went like 2 or 3 lanes to the left. Luckily, there was no cars there or anything. And, we were top fourth gear. And Dino's like, are we on slicks? Like, yeah, why? Just, scaring him to death. He had trying to kill Dino, That was a lot of fun. But we had also planned, I think it was the Friday night. So Friday night was at Kimco, which Kimco was a pretty big player at that point in time. They sponsored Cowlook.com, And so we planned a big barbecue and cruise night at Kimco on Friday night before the Saturday Carlsbad thing. And we had a band, and the guy that owned Kimco got a, like a taco truck or something. They were making, as you do, Southern California, making tacos in the parking lot. And I'd say probably 50 or 60 cars showed up. Daryl Baker was repping for McGuire's at the time, so he was giving out McGuire samples, and he was our MC. And Russ Hare this was in Newport Beach. Russ Hare showed up with a Sloval. He got a little overserved at one point. That was the year he showed up as Danger Russ. I don't know if you remember that or not. He dressed up in all 60s hippie garb and spent the whole weekend as an alter ego. But he got a little overserved and knocked the band off the stage accidentally. And it just eventually it got a little crazy, and the Loffers started the burnout contest there in the parking lot. No. And it wasn't 20 minutes before the police helicopters came over and got the spotlights, and then all the police showed up and surrounded us and kicked everybody out. Well, okay,
it happened. It happens quick. It used to be kind of a rite of passage when you would leave Nick's to do that, and then I remember, I think it was I can't remember the year Jesse James came out and got pulled over out in front of the Classic in front of everybody. But I think what had happened was I had just before that, because we were going to do something else. We had something else going on that night. It gets to where as a habit down there, you start making all these other plans. We're going to go to DKP for a little bit, then we'll go here. And you kind of want to be first in, first out, because if you're last in, you're not getting out of there until way late. But yeah, it's just now they kind of shut it down pretty quick. The cops, they usually have a cop car parked like right in the median, right, making sure nobody's doing burnouts anymore. But
that's your fault, though.
It's a shame. It's a shame it's gone now. You know what I mean? And so hopefully there's somewhere that they can do another Friday night. I think this weekend for the Classic coming up, I think there's going to be something at Pierside Parks now. So last time I went, they had the same thing, a taco truck and all that stuff, and CB Performance was there. So I'm looking forward to it this year. Man, I'm super excited about this year, the Classic and all that coming back, because for us out of towners, which we have that common bond together, like neither one of us are from Orange County. So I like getting especially for me, it might be different for you, but when I get out there, man, that cool air, my Volkswagen is like, ooh, what's this, summertime? And it's 80 degrees, like dry. It just seems to just be my Volkswagen runs better out there. And who knows, maybe this year, I don't think so, but listen, if a miracle happens and my split window's done, it would just be perfect. It would just be a perfect weekend of burning the car out. But I've got a few others to choose from. But you planning on coming out this year for anything?
Not this year, but I want to do it soon, because it's probably been 14, 15 years since I've been out there, which I don't know how that happens, Bill. It just, time flies. Maybe, it's been a long time for a VW event. I got real heavy into the Porsche thing, did a lot of that stuff. But now I'm just enjoying doing the Volkswagen stuff again.
Do you have is your Porsche 67?
It's a 70S.
A 70S. So, and where'd you find that? Is that mostly an original car? Or has it been restored?
No, it's a full restoration.
Did you do the restoration on that one?
A very good friend of mine did the body and paint. I did pretty much everything else.
Now that's a real car compared to a Volkswagen to restore.
There's a lot of similarities.
There's similarities, but glass doors and wiring are quite a bit different, I think, between those two.
A lot of the same principles, though. It's that German mindset, So,
how long did it take you to restore that one?
I think 5 years.
5 years?
Yeah, most of it is body shop, but it was a buddy deal, so part time.
Can't call and complain.
Right.
No, I hear you, man. I mean, that's a slick looking. I see you got the D spokes on that thing, or what?
Yeah. Old Americans.
Those are the same ones from the car. Or that's a second set.
No, it's a second set.
Oh, yeah. Living it up in the corn panzers over there.
Yeah,
That's
in the '67, the black car, I cut the cage out of it. I got rid of the turbo. I've got the motor out at Paradise. Jason's doing that for me. I'm going to take it back to what it was, and so I hope to get it out to some events here in the next year or so. Just as back as a traditional IDA Cowlook car. I really look forward to doing that. I miss having that car running.
Now, do you go to a bunch of shows out there in the Midwest? I mean, because there are some shows, they're not very huge, but enough of you guys are starting to sporadically pop up back there. Schwimmer's out on that
Right,
side of the country, and there's guys up in Canada, Greg that I've talked to, Stoggren up there. He's got some stuff, and I'm surprised you guys don't have like a big kind of meet in the middle VW thing, or is it just a completely different scene out there?
Yeah, and that's a long, like Schwimmer's 5.5 hours for me. Greg would be probably 12. Yeah, I mean it's big distances out here. So,
what's the biggest VW meet you go out there, or is the Porsche meet stronger?
Yeah, Porsche meets definitely stronger. I don't know the answer to that. There's Mark Schlachter and the Cincinnati VW Club put on a great show every fall. It's a VW and Porsche reunion. That's a very nice show. But there's no racing or anything like that. There's a show at my local track in June that is kind of being rejuvenated. The local shop ran it for about 20 years, and then he got sick of doing it. So one of the pro stock guys here in the area, just because he didn't want to see it die, kind of took it on. And he admits he's not a promoter, but he's just like, if someone doesn't take it on and help keep it alive, it's just going to die, and we'll have one less fun thing to do. So kudos to him for doing that. And it's a nice little show, and I think it'll grow. He's working real hard to get it going. But there's not really a lot, to be honest with you.
Now, have you found the difference between like the Porsche circles and the VW circles? Like, since you've been on the enthusiast side on both, I mean, it's two distinctly different kind of guys, but there are some of those crossover guys like you and guys that you'll meet that like they'll respect the Volkswagen because they're just a genuine car guy. You know what I mean? And I think Porsches are so expensive, and a lot of them have been maintained really well that you don't get baptized by fire like you do in the VW world, right? Like you buy some heap of junk VW and the thing just leaves you dead on the side of the road, and like you know what I mean? Most guys buy them out of financial situations. So have you found the difference between the two types of people? And then some of your style obviously bleeds over, which the D-spokes were really early, probably when you probably put them on the car before they were appreciated. You know what I mean? And now those things are super cool now. You know what I mean? It's definitely been some time.
It's a funny, I bought my 911 in 2002. Yeah.
Before they were cool.
Before they were expensive.
I don't mean to one up you, but I want to brag that I parted out a 65 9. Listen, I parted out a complete 65 911 that I bought for $400 from this off-road shop here, and I made $1,500 that weekend, so I've tripled my money, and that's how you get rich.
Yeah, the carburetors on that 911 are worth $7,500 probably now, but.
Well, I fought with a Porsche guy that was trying to buy them for $400, and I said no, they're $600, and he fought me for the triple throat Webers. And when he finally came back to buy them, I said, no, you're such a jerk, I won't even sell them to you because VW people are way cooler than you. But it's like, I mean, they had the 356 style gauges, it had everything. But yeah, that was in hindsight, if I'd have just put that car in my backyard and sat on it till then, it would have been, because it had rust around the rear window, and I was like, nah, this thing's out of here.
Oh God, yeah, that's a Virgin 1 owner back here. That's changed a lot, because when I bought into that car, it was more of a, I'm part of the R group, which was a bunch of hot rodder 911 guys back then, and they would drive anywhere, and the cars weren't pristine. It was kind of like the DKP. It was actually modeled after the DKP.
Was it? Yeah,
Roger Grego was one of the founding R group guys, and of course he was in DKP too back in the 70s, and so that's kind of where the idea or the concept came from.
Now, didn't one of the guys who started that thing just pass away recently?
Yeah, Chris Huergas passed away about 2 years ago, I guess. But
Yeah.
yeah, so at that time they weren't worth that much. I would take my 70S to a PCA event around here, and people would just look at you like, because oh, you're not a racer, and you don't own a new
Right.
Boxster, so what do we do with you? Um,
Right.
it was like, oh, you can't afford a new one, huh? And so you could have that little punk rock attitude you talked about with the Cowboy Films. You had the same kind of attitude with the early 911s. Then all of a sudden, they became really cool and valuable, and so that has made them a lot less fun. Um, they're because they're just too expensive, and the wrong. Well, I shouldn't say the wrong kind of people. That's not fair, but it's a different type of
It's a
person.
different crowd.
Yeah, they're buying them as investments and so but back then they weren't really that much different than a hardcore performance VW guy. It's
Right.
sort of the same
Because
mentality.
you were the guy that, like, before it became cool to have the early 911s, it was like, that car doesn't have air conditioning or cruise control. Why bother? Like, that's
Right.
an antiquated. And it was like, there's quite a few punk rock ones out there. There's a guy, Joshy Roberts, has one, and a couple other guys that just have like completely roached out 911s.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had in my personal purchase for $1,200 in 2005. I sold it for $3,500, and I laughed all the way to the bank.
Oh yeah,
because that's how you get rich.
yeah.
and in hindsight, this car was so stinking nice. I mean, it had a dent on the door, and I was like, nope, too much body work for me. And I was gonna buy it and keep it, and I ended up selling it. I've owned an '86 911, which people told me I was crazy when I bought it for 12,500. It had 186,000 miles.
Yeah.
And someone was like, man, you're an idiot for buying that car. And then I called my buddy that I met at Pomona, my good friend, C. Thomas Woodford. He did on the
I knew
Pelican
Tom.
parts. Yeah.
No, I knew Tom. Yeah.
Yeah, Tom, I met old Jersey Tom at the Pomona swap meet, and I used to bust his chops about Porsche parts that I tried to swipe on him on the cheap. He's like, no, I know you VW guys. You guys got money, so you can pay. He was like, I'm just a VW guy. But,
Believe it or not, Tom, the first car I shot for Excellence was a car that Tom built, and he was there with me when I photographed that car. So yeah.
He's one of the guys I'm talking about. He's a car guy,
Mm-hmm.
Porsche guy.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like he used to at Pomona Swap Meet, he had a late model bay window bus that was two-tone red and beige, and it had a flame pinstripe on the body line, but he had a 911 flat six in it, and he's just an old school Porsche mechanic. And I just talked to him probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. I called him. He lives in Winnemucca now, and he's trying to do salt flat stuff. He's trying to break 200 mile an hour in his 911. And
Nice.
He's just a solid dude. But like, those are the guys that I met at Pomona, and just good dudes that are car guys, irrespective. He's always given me the respect of just being a car guy, and he's a Porsche guy and I'm a VW guy. And I tell you, I called Tom Woodford before I bought the 911 just because I knew him from Pomona, and I said, hey, I'm gonna buy this car. He says, that car with 186,000 miles, it'll run for another 100,000.
Yeah.
And I had my '86 911, and it was in the driveway while my Volkswagens were in the garage. And so I thought, I should sell the 911. I sold it for 14 grand, and I laughed all the way to the bank. So how you get rich. And in hindsight, I don't know, man. Then the last one that I owned, I haven't purchased another one yet, but the last one that I owned was a 99 996.
Yep.
That the guy optioned out literally everything on. And I got spooked in about 2013, and I sold it for really, really, really good money. I sold it for 26 grand back then, and which was like they were selling for 18, 19 grand.
Yeah, that was good money.
Yeah, and this was a factory aero kit car, had every option on it. And I'm longing for another 911. But the difference is between driving a 911 and driving a Volkswagen. In your Volkswagen, you're trying to race everybody. In your 911, everyone is trying
Right.
to race you
Right.
all the time. Especially, I don't know what it is. Especially the guys in the Chrysler 300s. I don't know what the deal is with the Chrysler 300s, but those guys think those cars are super fast.
Well,
And
you talk about the punk rock thing, and I know that I love that analogy. I think Bill Schwimmer kind of coined that with his car and what they were doing back there in the 80s and stuff. But I think that's why the street car stuff and even the racing has kind of died out now. Because, in the early 2000s, a 12-second street car was a fast car. There
right.
was not much on the street that would hang with the Beetle.
Sure.
I drove around on slicks all the time. He said, "Hey, I'm in Ohio and I'm in a Volkswagen. The cops are
Yeah.
not going to notice who's going to look that I'm on slicks." So I'm on slicks.
Sure.
I'm rear motored. It made power on the street from stoplight to stoplight. There was nothing hardly at all that would keep with it. Now everything's got 300, 400, 500 horsepower, traction control, blah blah blah. It's not fast anymore. A 12-second Beetle just is not fast. I used to go to the strip. I literally had people at Test and Tune night in the lanes. They'd wave you through to come around to into the water box, and no one would follow me. And I'd just sit there and wait because no one wanted to race the Volkswagen because it was a no-win situation. It's like Gene Berg always said: if you win, big deal, you beat a Volkswagen, but if you lose,
right.
And so I had that happen to me, that no one would go race me because back then that was quick, but now it's not that quick. And I think that's why, you don't have kind of that punk rock mentality going around wanting to race everybody. And I think that's part of the reason why you don't see so many performance, 12-second cars being built anymore.
Yeah.
Plus it's expensive.
Well, but I think, we're, a lot of us we're all getting a little bit older, and we're moving to a demographic where we have the money to build it the way that we want it now.
Mm-hmm.
And my problem is I just keep buying other projects that are diverting me from where I'm trying to go.
It's easier that way, isn't it?
I need to
than actually working on one. Just buying another one's a lot easier.
Right. But the problem is I can't ever leave anything alone. So I buy it, and then I make this mental list of these 50 things it needs, and then I don't want to touch it. And then now I got all these cars that need all this work. So in my head, I've been going through this evolution of like, okay, I have to either find a nice place to park these cars or start to thin the herd and really build. Because I was talking to Lee Bashaw, and I looked at his car. I was telling my wife about Lee and his car and all this stuff, and I'm looking at a super nice picture of this car that he sent me, and I'm looking at it, and I said to my wife, how come I just can't be happy with one really nice car? Just one car that's really nice. Why do I have to have a bus and a Ghia and,
Well, at least you haven't got totally insane and went and bought a race car. That would be really stupid. Oh, wait.
Wait a second.
Wait a second.
I didn't buy a race car. I parked my money in the shape of a race car that I can always get my money back out as long as I don't continue to keep throwing money into it, because race cars are cheap. I'm not 100% sure. But I thought it's too cheap not to buy it. And then come to find out, as I'm looking at this race car, it's a freaking 64 steel sunroof car.
Oh, wow.
Like, yeah, I was like, because I didn't get, obviously it's a race car, didn't get a title for it, all this stuff. Now I'm going to get the title and all these things for it. And, not that I'm ever going to restore it, but it's one other thing that makes it kind of fun. So we'll see. Bill T will be campaigning a race car coming up. And it's going to be, it'll be me or my brother driving it. And
I got one word for you. Transaxle. Transaxle.
And so I'm asking the question. So you raced your car a bunch. How many seasons or things did you get out of your tranny?
It was Russian roulette. You never knew. It generally, what I found is the further from home or the less convenient to get home it was, the more likely the gearbox would grenade. I made the stupid mistake of flat towing my car an hour to a track one time. Wow. And blew up the ring and pinion.
Flat towing it?
Well, no, racing it, on the starting line. It was like, great launch, 50 foot, and hucks the gearbox on the ground.
Yeah.
And then how do I get it home? It's a swing axle car that's got a big box of rocks in it. So I had to, had to call a flatbed and flatbed the thing home 70 miles or whatever it was. That was expensive. Yeah, it just got old after a while, especially with a street car. As a race car, you just Zeus fasten off the body panels and you have full access to everything, and you just throw the motor on the ground. It's no big deal. You don't have to take the carburetors off. That's a lot simpler process. But with a street car, you really got to disassemble the thing. And when I was young, it was fun. And then it became less fun and more expensive. It just, after a while, it's like, this isn't worth it to go out. The last race I went to Indy, and, I didn't have a trailer. So I rented a trailer and borrowed a truck and took it over there, and we had a hotel, and I had race fuel and, registration, whatever the entry fee was. And the first practice pass went 20 feet, and it's done. Put it back on the trailer. And that was it. I'm like, this is it was a heavy car. It was a street car. So
yeah,
it's just kind of a fool's errand. But yeah, that kind of burnt me out on it.
Yeah, it gets to be, if you can't even listen, you're talking to a guy who I blocked up my motor and sold my 63 ragtop and vowed never to go back to Volkswagens. And so here I am all these years later, got reeled back into it. But yeah, it's a tough thing, which is why my philosophy with the drag bug is overbuild it and underdrive it. So we'll see how well that works. But we'll see. I mean, it's got built stuff. Like I said, it was $5,000 for a complete car, motor, IDAs.
Wow, really?
Like the whole thing. I can take it to the track now, right now. So that's the reason why I had to move on it, because, I figure I get a couple good passes out of it. My brother can drive and fix and all that fun stuff too. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But
yeah, it's hard to beat that.
Right. Yeah. But listen, my brother, I told him, I said, hey man, you drive as much as you want, whatever the case. He's like, yeah, I'm probably gonna be the one fixing it anyway. I said, you probably are, George.
Probably are.
You probably are. So, but it's what we do. It's what we do for the hobby, right? It's what we do for this ridiculous passion that I don't know how it gets started or how it gets going, but
it's
I'm
fun.
thankful for it, man.
Yeah, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thankful for it. I'm thankful for the friends I've made, the people that I've done, and I really enjoy being able to do the podcast and bring all of this to people that don't really get to know who's who and what's what in the VW scene, and I believe it brings the scene closer together. You know what I mean? People kind of get to feeling like they know you a little bit after listening to a couple guys yak for an hour and a half. You know, so
especially the older guys that you've been bringing on the podcast from the 80s. The guys we were reading about back then, and you're dredging them up and getting them on. That's been a lot of fun. But yeah, we joked earlier about dropping names and stuff. All those people that I interacted with, from Dino and Cormac and Schwimmer and Beecher, just the Paradise guys. The reason I bring them up is I love them. They've been so good to me, all of them. I've got some excellent friends out of this. Had a lot of fun, but yeah, good people have treated us well over the years, done a lot of favors, that sort of thing. So that's been the real fun thing through all this, is just meeting some excellent people, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, if you're ever in a scenario and you're trapped somewhere, you hope the other guy's a VW guy, man, because at least they're going to be two things. You're going to have some kind of camaraderie, and they're going to be resourceful, man. They're going to figure out how to make chicken soup out of chicken poop, man.
Right.
So
unless they're a Type 3 guy that figures out you cut up a Type 34,
then they're not talking to you. But no, man, it's been great having you on the podcast, man. For sure, we'll do it again. Anything you have new and good, or anything like that coming up that I can help get some more eyeballs to, or any of that kind of stuff, man, by all means, I'm looking forward to it. And hopefully, if I head out Midwest, I'll track you down. I promise that. And if you come out to the West Coast, man, look me up, because I'd definitely love to hang out with you for a little bit and shoot the breeze and look at cars and act stupid. That's what we do.
Yeah.
Well, man, it's great having you on here. People want to get in touch with you. How can they grab it? They get you on Facebook or Instagram?
Facebook, Instagram. I think Corn Panzer on Instagram.
Nice.
And I think just my name on Facebook, if I remember right.
Well, very cool, man. Very cool. I'm glad we finally got to sit down and get you on the podcast, brother.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill. I appreciate it. It's been a lot of
Well,
fun.
cool, man. Have a good night.
Okay. Thanks, buddy. See you.
Okay.